So good morning again. For more than 10 years, I was a member of the Faith Welcoming Roundtable of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. The roundtable included representatives from each of the major denominations, LGBTQ organizations, and a few of us who represented national organizations. I was one of the only clergy in the group who was then living in a heterosexual marriage. In the mid-2000s, when I was on the task force, we were beginning to understand that gay and lesbian were insufficient to what we now call the queer community. And LGBT had morphed into the mouthful LGBTQIAA+, and sometimes more. So we were discussing these new letters and this acronym, and I said somewhat in jest at the meeting, you know, I wish I had a letter. A young man from the task force, PJ Serrano, said to me, well, Debra, you have a letter, you're the A. I answered, well, PJ, I know I'm older than you are, but I'm not asexual. And he responded, no, Debra, your A stands for ally. I was frankly mystified at the time. Ally, that sounded like someone outside of the community, and I felt like so much a part of it. As a sexologist and as a minister, I know that all of our sexual rights are threatened if anyone's rights to a responsible, sexually healthy adulthood are threatened. And today, I want to proudly come out to you as a queer advocate. I have been that advocate since I was 12 years old, and my parents took us on a field trip to Fire Island to see gay people. As a college student, I started the first gay and lesbian support group at Wesleyan University. As a young sex educator, I learned that people don't choose their sexual orientation, but as adolescents or young adults, or maybe even younger, we learn who we're attracted to, who we fantasize about, who we fall in love with. As a seminarian, I came to understand that sexual and gender diversity is part of God's, or if you prefer, creation's blessing, and that people of diverse sexual and gender identities are well represented in the Bible if you take off your heterosexist glasses. As the mother of a teenager who came out to us when he was 15, and who now identifies as a gender non-conforming queer person, part-time drag queen in love with a trans partner, I've learned more than I have time to share with you. And here is a picture of me with my youngest child as Mama Celeste at the Reston Pride Festival. So I understand that we are being asked to stretch ourselves in our understanding of sexuality and gender in new ways from when many of us grew up. Most of us grew up with the idea that there were two genders, males and females, and maybe three sexual orientations. If you didn't assume everyone was straight, there was gay, straight, and maybe bisexual. Did you know that today Facebook provides 71 different words to describe your gender? And there are more than 40 ways to describe one's sexual orientation. It can be a bit overwhelming for those of us who grew up in that binary limited world. Now, my own attitudes and understandings about sexual orientation and gender identity have changed during my 45 years in this field. For example, in the early 2000s, I believed that domestic partnerships or civil unions were adequate for same-sex couples, and that marriage for all was certainly unlikely and perhaps unnecessary. That is until the day I went to New Paltz. You may vaguely remember that after Gavin Newsom started marrying people in California, there was a young 26-year-old mayor in New Paltz, New York, who decided he would marry same-sex couples. He was told by the district attorney to stop, and so in stepped in two Unitarian Universalist ministers to marry the first 25 people, and they were promptly arrested. There was a call that went out for ministers, and I thought, if not me, who? So I went to New Paltz with 6 of my colleagues under threat of arrest with the New York Times and CNN there. One of the couples I married that Saturday was two 67-year-old men in matching jackets and bow ties. They had been together for 35 years. One of their mothers had flown up to witness the ceremony. So this 93-year-old woman was standing in front to the side of me as I married her son, holding her pocketbook in both hands, and she cried as they spoke their vows. She said to me afterward, "I am so happy to have lived to see my son married." I understood in that moment that marriage, the term, the concept, the word marriage was or more important than legal protections. And I became a marriage equality activist that day. I've since performed many weddings of same-sex and different gender couples. And here's a slide of me with Nani and Amy right before the pandemic. Nani is a cisgender, same gender loving woman, and Amy transitioned during her time at my church. So I am very proud, and I know many of you are also proud of how the Unitarian Universalist Association has consistently been a leader in LGBTQ rights. Although I want you to know we still have work to do to be fully inclusive. It was way back in 1970, so more than 50 years ago, that the UUA passed its first resolution to end discrimination against homosexuals and bisexuals. That's what they called it. Although you may not know, we didn't ordain our first openly gay clergy person until the late 1970s, and we didn't ordain our first transgender person until 20 years later. Trans clergy are now just being called by congregations to pastorates, and I think we still have a long way to go to support bisexuals, transgender, and non-binary people. I was delighted to find out that you all fly a rainbow flag, that you close your sanctuary for Pride Sunday, and that you have gone through the process of being a welcoming congregation. I wonder if you know that the UUA has a new recertification program called the 5 Pillars of Welcome, which I hope a group of you will consider completing the paperwork for. This service today would fill the requirements of one of those pillars. So I'm going to ask you to consider something that I can see many of you don't do, which is that you start posting your own pronouns here on Zoom, as I've asked the staff to do along with me, and also in person on your name tags when you return to in-person services. It is important to use a person's pronouns and to offer your own. There's a website called My Pronouns, and they describe it this way. Using someone's correct personal pronouns is a way to respect them and create an inclusive environment, just as using a person's name is a way to respect them. They go on. It can be offensive or harassing to guess at someone's pronouns and refer to them using those pronouns if that's not how that person wants to be known. Or worse, actively choosing to ignore the pronouns someone has stated that they go by could imply the oppressive notion that intersex, transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people do not or should not exist. So if you don't know which pronouns to use with somebody, you can offer your own and then ask them theirs. You can say something like, I use the pronouns she or he or they. Tell me what pronouns you use. And let me just say, if you're concerned about the grammar of the use of the they as a singular, it comes with practice. I've gotten really good around my kids learning to use they. So the bottom line for sexual and gender diversity is that people are who they say they are. And asking someone's pronouns, using them, and offering your own helps celebrate that diversity. See, our commitment to LGBTQ people, to all people, grows out of our own theology, right? We have a theological commitment in the first principle to the dignity and worth of all persons. And that means we have to understand that sexual and gender diversity is a blessing. We believe that the sin is never sex, but sexual exploitation. The sin isn't homosexuality. The sin is homophobia, the denigration of our neighbors because they are physically and emotionally attracted to people of the same sex and gender. The sin isn't being transgender, it's expressing transphobia. The sin is heterosexism, the presumption that heterosexuality is normative for all people and morally superior. The sin is forcing people to deny the gift of their sexuality and gender, and to suffer to try to live their ways in a way that's antithetical to who they really are. And surely, my friends, the sin is violence and discrimination against women and LGBTQ people and the denial of their civil rights. Although, as I've learned this week in my research, California is actually one of the very best states for anti-discrimination laws for queer people, there is still a dire need, and a dire need for you to advocate for federal protections for all people, especially in light of the conservative ascendancy in the US Supreme Court. Even today, the research tells us that 1 in 3 queer Americans report experiencing discrimination in public spaces, on the job, in schools, in their own neighborhoods, harms that fall disproportionately on LGBTQ people of color. So my friends, I'm going to ask you, can you pledge with me as we approach National Coming Out Day to come out as a queer advocate, regardless of your own sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression? Because as we're going to sing together in a few minutes, we are all in this together. We are gay, straight, bisexual, lesbian, pansexual, asexual, demisexual, non-binary, gender fluid, trans, and cisgender together. None of our rights are guaranteed unless all of our rights are guaranteed. All of us are called to come out every day as our most authentic selves. I'm going to end this sermon with these words by Reverend Teresa Soto, the senior minister of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, California, a queer, brown, disabled person. They write, "To be free, you must embrace the breadth of your very own existence without apology, even if they try to take it from you. Inside, you are an entire universe's milky blue, magenta, and gold expanding. But to actually be free, you must know and you must fight for the entire universe inside of everyone else. Being free is not a license, but a promise. And so, my friends, may it be. Join me in coming out."